We provide pay cards as a service free to our clients, so there's no charge for that service. Pay card that we use is provided to us by Central National Bank in Enid, Oklahoma. The service is facilitated through ITS. It's an online application for processing ACH and auto payments. It's a very simple and easy step for us as the payroll company to enroll each employee. It's painless, really, and there's no setup or any kind of application that the client is involved in. It's very quick turnaround. We can set it up and enroll it online for any employee, no matter how many that you may have. It can take usually anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, but we like to have as much notice as we possibly can. The real kicker, the real important aspect of the pay card is the low cost. There's absolutely no check cashing fee. There's no delay. Also want to add that in. A lot of times when you're dealing with a paper check and you're going to the bank, there's all kinds of issues that can come up, from a lost check to an employee not realizing that there's fees for cashing the check. Some banks charge up to $15, $20 for a check cashing fee, so having a pay card, you don't have to worry about that cost. Also, for point of service purchases and even cash back, there's no charge. So if you're out at the grocery store picking up some loaf of bread or milk, and you want to use your pay card, you can also use that for a cash withdrawal with no charge. All of this can be managed online by the employee or even by the phone. So when you get their card and they have to activate it, they can do so by phone if they don't have any access to the web. There's a lot more information that I can get into, as you can see down there at the bottom. If you have any questions or comments, or you just want to inquire about pay cards and how they work, you can give us a call at the number listed below. Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you, Sean. Well, now that we've talked a little bit about pay cards, if you have any questions, you can give us a call, like Sean said, here at our offices. We want to take some time to talk about our Safety Minute. I'm going to introduce to you Ron Wofford here at Partners Human Resources. He is our Director of Risk Management. Ron, tell us about heat risk.
I want to talk to you this morning about heat stress. The main thing that we need to let you know is always be prepared whenever the weather changes, whether it's extreme heat or extreme cold. Be prepared, know what the warning signs are whenever you start getting lightheaded or dizzy, maybe slurred speech, or the possibility that you quit sweating. Whenever you drained all of the moisture and water from your body, you'll stop sweating, and that's when heat stress or heat stroke typically comes in. The best thing to do is hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Drink plenty of liquids. Statistics show that you need to drink 5 to 7 ounces every 20 minutes in extreme heat. The sport drinks, Gatorade, Powerade, the stuff that has electrolytes and some of your sodiums in it are better to hydrate you and working in those atmospheric conditions. Those are really good. We had a question the other day whether or not to have an ice cold, chilled, or just room temperature. Because typically that would send an extra shock factor to the body. Cool, just ice down a little bit, better for the employees. Another thing is pay attention to your coworkers. Maybe you're doing okay in the heat, but you've got a coworker that isn't quite hydrated enough. They start stumbling, acting dizzy or weak. Get them into some shade, get them cooled down. Maybe even if you're working outside, get them inside the cab of an air-conditioned vehicle and cool them down. So away from the work site, pay attention to your kids, children, children do that for themselves always. In the evening, whenever you're home away from work, eat a good healthy meal. Try to abstain from drinking too much alcohol. You know, a good liquid for hydration. It goes right through your body and your back. Extracurricular activities. We need to watch going out and playing softball after you work, because you will work a hard day, you sweat out your fluid out there and be strenuous in playing softball, running bases, chasing kids around the soccer field, whatever it is. Limit those activities too. If you have lawn care to do, wait till the latest part of the evening and start to go out to do that. Thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to send us in, call us, let us know. We'll be more happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate that safety minute. It's very appropriate, like I said, this time of year. Next up is our main speaker, and our topic for our main speaker today is interviewing and hiring skills. We're bringing to you Kyle Killingsworth, who's got two of the highest credentials that you can get in the country, and he is a senior human resource specialist. And I'm going to turn it over to Kyle and let Kyle tell you about the skills that you can work on.
Thanks, Ronnie. Welcome, everyone. And I want to, again, kind of start out with a little disclosure that in 25 years of corporate America, I have made plenty, probably in the hundreds of bad hiring decisions, and even coached managers in hiring the wrong individuals. It took me a while to learn the skill set in raising the percentage of successful hires, and I wanted to share that with the group today. I go back to our friend Jim Collins in the book Good to Great about 12 years ago, and he started the phrase of getting the right people on the bus, meaning getting the right people in your company, having that right skill set, that right fit inside your company, and getting them in the right role. And the way he phrased it was getting the right people on the bus and in the right seats on the bus. In other words, fit that role, fit that person into that role that's going to be successful with what's required. And the way that we try and do that in the HR world is we match the role with individuals' skills and experience. And so when you think about the hiring process, most of us hiring managers think about looking for a skill set that's required for that role, and then a level of experience that would make them proficient in that skill set. So you may have skill sets listed on your job posting, as well as a number of years experience in that role. For example, you may put 3 to 5 years experience required to ensure that they're proficient in those skills that's required for the role to be successful. So when we hire, we typically look for skills and we look for experience. But when we look at terminating someone, and you look at the reasons why you terminate individuals, it's usually not because of their skills or experience or the lack of. It's usually because of their behaviors. They cannot operate in the environment of your organization. For example, if you have a customer service area, a phone bank where customers would make inquiries and call in, it's important that open at a certain time for those customer calls, those inbound customer calls. If an individual struggles to get to work on time, that behavior of being late, of being tardy, is not going to be acceptable in your environment. So they will not be successful. So it's the behaviors that we want to focus on today, because actually you can look at someone's resume, you can look at that application they submitted, and in just a few minutes as a hiring manager, you can determine if they have that skill set and they have that experience. Granted, you'd want to validate that during the interview process, but you can determine that very quickly. And skills and experience that you are expecting that role to have and that level of expertise and proficiency. What we don't know is about their behavior. That's not indicated on their application. That's not reflected in their resume. So we're going to take the interview time and talk about their behavior. And this is about being a fit. Is their behavior going to fit into your organization? Is the way that they behave and conduct themselves a good fit for your team? Because that's what we normally miss at. So we're going to talk about behavioral-based interviewing and actually learn some skills and some examples on how to pose questions that will reveal one's behavior in certain circumstances. So this is based on the assumption that the way they behave in the past, their past performance, is the best indicator of you, how they behave, and how they job in your organization, on your team. So the way we do that is that we ask questions, we ask those closing questions about critical incidents in the past that the individual has been involved in that can reveal and demonstrate the behaviors necessary to be successful in your organization at that job. Again, we're going to focus on the job. What's required on the job. We're not going to talk about personality. A little bit more. So why would you want to be in this way? Well, it continues to show you have a much better chance of doing a much higher percentage. Sorry, everyone. We kind of lost audio there for a second. We're going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about why behavioral-based interviewing, and again, the study has shown the predictability of a good hire is around the 70% mark. And when you could contrast that to regular hiring or traditional interviewing, we have a validity rate of about 20%. In other words, about 1 in 5 is the best hire for that job. And what you're actually doing in a traditional interview is you're comparing candidate against candidate. In other words, you're looking for the best candidate in that role, the most qualified individual. And I'm here to suggest that the best candidate may not be the best fit. The most qualified individual, meaning the one with the most experience, may not have the behaviors that it's going to take to be successful in the role that you're interviewing for. So we're going to begin to talk more about what that fit looks like in the candidate search that you're looking for. A little bit more to have a better understanding around behavioral theory. Again, this is about past behavior. This is not about what you might do, what one might do given the circumstances. We're going to talk and ask questions regarding specific past behavior that one has demonstrated over time. So we'll pose questions regarding situations that that candidate has been involved in the past, and you will probe those questions down and see if the behavior, the actions that they took is a good fit for the role that you have in your organization. The last bullet point on the screen says, would this type of behavior fit well in our environment with our team? This is the question you need to be asking yourself during a behavioral-based interview. When you're probing, think of this question. Once they describe to you what they've done and how they've done it, the question is, would that behavior fit in our team? Let's continue to talk a little bit more about behavioral profiles. You say, we need to create a behavioral profile, and this is very important up front. You need to understand what it takes to be successful in the job that you're interviewing for. And you say, well, I'm not real sure. And that's fine. What you need to do is look at your top performers. Look at the stars that are on your team and ask the following questions. How they learn new things, how they detect and even solve and resolve problems. How do they make decisions and how do they communicate? A key one is what motivates them. What motivates them personally to be successful in that role. They're a top performer for some series of reasons. And what we want to understand is, why are they successful? What makes them successful? What traits make them successful? And these are some questions that you can ask those top performers, or even view those top performers, to have an understanding of what makes people successful. So here is a partial list of behaviors, of competencies, of traits that would reflect behaviors for success. For example, it may be important in a role for someone to be creative. If they're not going to be creative, if they're not creative and innovative, then they may not be successful in that role. So it's important that we understand and we have a good view of their creativity, because if that's maybe what it's going to take to be successful. There may be another trait that you want in an individual around problem solving. There's going to be a reliability around the fact that this role is going to be in a position that's going to solve problems. That's what this role is. They're going to be hit with a lot of different things, so they need to be solving problems on a daily basis. Well, then let's check for that competency. Let's check for behaviors and ask questions that would reveal how they solve problems and what the results of their actions around that problem solving and what that looks like. Another example would be around teamwork. If they're going to be on a project team, if they're going to be in close proximities with others and working together, let's check and see how they do with teamwork. What's their philosophy around that? How have they been successful in that? Actually, how do they do it? And let's check that by asking historical questions about their behavior, which will reveal how they go about teamwork and if that would fit in our organization, in our environment. Let me give you an example. We talked about some traits. For project management, some behaviors, some traits that we may pick off that list would be decision making. A project manager is going to have to make some calls. They're going to have to solve problems that people bring to them. They're going to have to be resourceful and reach out to other resources and line those up. They're going to have to lead the team, so teamwork's important, as well as time management. Most of your projects that you're involved with have a deadline associated with it, and they need to manage accordingly to that deadline. So these would be some traits, these would be some behaviors that would be almost required in a project management role in an organization to be successful. These aren't necessarily reflected on that application or on that resume. So we would ask those probing behavioral-based questions to understand better of how they behaved in the past around this set of competencies of decision making, problem solving, resourcefulness, teamwork, and time management. Those are the things that are going to drive, those are the traits that are going to drive this individual to success. So let's talk about the questions themselves. We'll want to, after we determine what those competencies are that are critical to success, we can see those in our top performers. Those are the models. That's where we get that information. We build that profile and identify 3, 4, or 5 competencies, traits that's going to be required to fit into our organization to be successful. We'll then develop questions around those traits, around those competencies, around those behaviors that are critical to be successful in the role that we're interviewing for. And the key is using open-ended questions. You want to use open-ended questions that lead to an incident, an event that has happened in the past, and be specific about what they did, what was their role in that incident, in that event, in that opportunity, whatever it may be. So you lead with open-ended questions. And here are just some phrases that you can utilize at the beginning of an open-ended question. Tell me about a time when, that gives them an opportunity to tell a story. Give me an example. Again, we're talking about something that's happened. We're not talking about or asking them about what would you do if a certain situation came up. We're asking them what they did do in an historical event. Some more would be describe for me. A good one is how did you handle the situation, where, et cetera, happened, and what did you do when? These are some good opening phrases to develop those questions. And you may want to develop 4 or 5 or 6 questions in advance, again, based on those competencies, those behaviors that you have determined are critical for one to be successful in the role that you're interviewing for. We had that partial list a moment ago. You look at your top performers in the role and ask yourself and ask them, what is it that makes them successful? Those are your critical success factors. Those are the behaviors that you want to probe in your interview process to ensure that the candidate possesses those, because that's what it's going to take to be successful in that role. That's what it's going to take to be a top performer in the role that you're interviewing for. A little bit more around the interviewing process before we look at some specific examples. Again, we are going to only interview those candidates that we have already determined have the right skills and the experience that we're looking for. We can determine that, again, by the resumes and by the applications that have been submitted. So basics around interviewing, we want to make arrangements. We don't want to be disturbed. We don't want phone calls coming in. We don't want people coming in the door that's going to be very disruptive. We want to put the candidate at ease. They're going to be a lot more open with us, and we want to ask all the candidates the same questions if possible. You should build out those questions, those behavioral-based questions, and you're able to ask the candidates the same questions to see how they're going to respond under circumstances that will drive certain behaviors, and then you can easily determine if their actions, their behaviors is what you expect from that person in your organization. The second to last bullet, I think, is very important. We want to probe. Peel back the layers of the onion. Continue to ask questions. We'll see how to do that a little bit in a future slide and learn some skills around that until we can see exactly what played out in that critical incident. What was that? What did that look like? The slide indicates that you can see a movie in your mind as to exactly what they did. You need to have a very clear understanding of what that behavior is and how it turned out. And the way that you do that is continually asking those probing questions. Let's talk a little bit more about what probing questions mean. And this is examples here of a question. Tell me about a time when you were under a great deal of pressure to deliver on time. This may be a trait, again, when I go back to the example of the project manager, where it's critical that they meet deadlines. So you want to talk about a time in the past, not what would you do, but what did you do when you were under a great deal of pressure to deliver on time. You may need to probe deeper, because what you really want to understand is what did you do to get the work done on time. This isn't about the team, and this isn't about their boss, or this isn't about the vendor. This is about them. We want to understand clearly what they did. What was their role? You also want to understand the results. So you took these actions in the circumstances, and how did that turn out? What was the outcome? Was it successful, or was it detrimental? So again, the focus is on what they did. And then you can ask some questions, even probing further. If you were faced with a similar situation in the future, what would you deal with it? Would you deal with it the same way or differently? That gives them the opportunity to reflect back on their behavior and the results associated with that, and see if maybe there was an alternate behavior that would yield even alternate or better results associated with that. And you could it's always good to ask them why. Again, an open-ended question. Why did you take that approach? Why did you deal with it in a certain way? These are some examples of some probing questions. Let's talk a little bit more about probing questions, because this is critical in the behavioral-based interviewing to understand how they're going to act, how they're going to behave in your organization. Take this question, for example. Describe the most effective team that you were part of or led. Here's some additional probing questions that you may want to ask them. If teamwork is a trait, is a competency, is a behavior that you expect in this particular role, then this would be a good question. Describe the most effective team that you were a part of. Well, what was your role exactly? We want to, again, focus on what they did. Do you have, what did you find most challenging? We want to have an understanding of the challenges they faced, and how did they overcome those challenges? What was the results? How did it turn out? Why did you consider it the most effective team you've ever been a part of? You want to understand what success looks like to them in a team environment, in that team environment. So these are just some examples of some questions, some more of those probing questions that you want to be a part of. One more example would be describe a time when you had to choose between product delivery and quality. Product delivery and quality. This may be something that an operations team deals with. And again, here are some probing questions that you may want to ask to kind of pull back the layers, have a better understanding of what exactly they did. The second question, how did you deal with those obstacles? Again, we don't want to focus on the team. We don't want to focus on the boss. We want to focus on what they did. What did they do with the obstacles that were facing them regarding this product delivery versus quality? Some other probing questions, maybe what feedback did you get from others? In other words, what was the perception that others had in the actions that they had? So there's a lot of probing questions that you can ask. It does not take that long to prepare for the interview, but you need to think through these circumstances. And again, I would encourage you in advance to draft out the questions after you understand what it's going to take to be successful by looking at stars. Look at your stars. They will guide you as to what's important in that role to be successful. What behaviors, what traits are necessary to be successful in that role. I'm going to pause for just a second before we go on to the next section to see if there are any questions that one has. If you want to take your phones off mute, if you want to
and ask a question, or if you'd like to type a question in the chat box, I'm going to pause for just a second and allow someone to, anyone that has a question to ask. Okay, let's move forward. I just want to take just a second in interviewing some basic interviewing techniques around what we need to stay away from. Many of you are aware of this, but just briefly, what we want to stay away from and not necessarily probe into during the interview process is around some legal potholes that we could step into. And so it's best to stay away from these topics and stick to job-related topics. We've talked about trying to probe behaviors, competencies, and traits, and so that does not have much to do or anything to do with one's race or color or religion or national origin or marital status. These are just issues that we want to stay away from. You've seen these lists before, but just a quick refresher on this. In fact, I want to do a little bit of testing around this so that we have a good understanding. So here's a question here. Would this be appropriate or not in an interview process? You have a very unusual last name. German ancestry? Probably want to stay away from national origin. So this question would not be appropriate. What about this second question? Can you think of anything that would prevent you from being to work on time? I think this would be most appropriate, particularly in a time-sensitive role. We talked earlier about a customer service position and how important it would be to be at your station ready to receive those inbound calls from customers. So that would be an important piece of their job, is to be on time, to be prompt. So this question would be appropriate. And we're not so concerned about how they're going to get to work, whether they have a car or whether they take public transportation or that somebody drops them off or they have a bicycle. We're not really concerned with that. What we're concerned with is if they're there on time. Let's don't focus about how they're going to get there. It's more importantly is if they are there as the job required. Here's another question. You say that you have 3 children. Since you brought it up, will your family obligations prevent you from overnight travel? Appropriate or inappropriate? My sense is there's a better way to ask that question. If the job does require overnight travel, then a better way to approach that, is there anything that you can think of that would prevent you from being able to travel overnight and not bring up the family side of it? There may be other circumstances that wouldn't allow that. So you want to open that question up and not just reflect the family and stay away from that family situation. Have you ever been arrested? Most of our applications ask about criminal convictions, particularly felony convictions. So what we're talking about is convictions. We're not talking about arrest, because as we know in the United States, we are innocent until proven guilty. So just because someone's arrested doesn't mean that they're convicted. And normally those convictions and that discussion is had later during some criminal history check. So I stay away from that question. And finally, one other one to look at. Tell me about the advantages and disadvantages of team assignments. I think this question would be appropriate for someone who's going to be working in a team environment. So I think this would be most appropriate given the circumstances. So those are just some questions to stay away from, some general interviewing techniques. I think many hiring managers take the interview as the opportunity to sell the company, to sell themselves as a manager, and even to sell the position. There's a time for that, but during the candidate interview, that's not the time for that. It's a time to be listening. It's a time to be learning. It's a time to be understanding about that candidate. What skills do they bring? What experience are they bringing? Validate that they can have the skills and the experience to be successful in that role, and then ask those behavioral-based questions regarding what it's going to take to be successful in that role, whether it's around time management, or whether it's around communication skills, or whether it's around problem solving. Once you've identified what those are, in other words, what makes our star performers successful, our top performers successful, then go to the marketplace and search through the interview process for those traits, for those behaviors, and ask those open-ended questions. Ask those open-ended questions. It's always a good idea to allow the candidate to ask questions after you've finished your line of questions. Normally, what a candidate will ask you is, what are next steps in this process? So I would go ahead and answer that up front, and a good phrase to use around that is the fourth bullet point down in quotes. We'll make an offer to the person we choose based on being the best candidate for this position. It may not be the most qualified. Many times you'll say, and have learned to say that we're going to offer the role to the most qualified individual. Well, the most qualified individual may not be the best fit. You may determine that someone with 3 years experience and their behavior fits in better with your organization than the individual that had 5 years experience. So it may not be the most qualified, it's going to be the best candidate. And a big part of that qualifier is, how are they going to act? How are they going to behave? Is that in line with the culture that we've created? Is that in line with the values that we want our employees to have? That's what's revealed in behavioral-based interview questions, because you're looking and learning about how they've behaved in the past, the actions that they have taken in the past. So I say there is some due diligence, there is some prep work associated with this type of interviewing. Again, the first step is to look at your top performers and understand why they're successful, what traits do they demonstrate, what behaviors do they participate in to make them successful, and then build your questions around those traits, and then be ready and prepared with those probing questions to dig even deeper as to why they did what they did. Why, in those circumstances, why did they act and take the actions they did? So this does take a little extra time. Why go to all that trouble? Well, because of the validity that you have of 70% of hiring the right manager, because the cost of that wrong hire is substantial. It's 1 to 2.5 times that employee's annual salary. The reason it's normally that high is because we tend to go too long. We tend to go too long with individuals and hope things will get better, and they'll get better in their role and they'll grow in their role, when they really don't have the traits or the competencies to be successful in that role. So I just want to give you a few sample questions here. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll give you an opportunity at the end to ask any questions and to get a copy, and how to get a copy of this presentation. But here's a sample question for decision makers. Again, if you determine that this role that you're hiring for, that candidate needs to be a good decision maker, then here are some behavioral-based questions that you may want to ask them. Describe an unpopular decision you had to make. Or the last one, give me an example of a time when you had to make an important decision with limited facts. These are some good questions for that trait, for that behavior of decision maker. Here's a couple of questions for problem solvers. Tell me about a time when you had to analyze facts quickly, define key issues, and respond immediately. Or the last one, give me an example of when you anticipated potential problems and developed preventive measures. Again, these are some good open-ended questions that will reveal to you how they handled situations around problem solving. If you define that one of the traits is resourcefulness, here are some more questions that you can ask them, ask that individual. Give me an example of when you had to learn something new and produce results on your own. Many of us are in standalone positions, and it's important for us to be able to be creative and produce and learn and produce results on our own. For teamwork, a few questions associated with this that will reveal, again, their behaviors. Describe your most recent team experience. Tell me about your most successful team project and the role you played in it. Again, we're focusing on what they did, how did they make it successful, and what were the exact results associated with that. In other words, how did that turn out? They took a certain action. How did that play out? You want to understand that, and that will reveal to you if that would fit into your organization. It may be a good fit, the actions they took, but then again, it may be questionable. And if it's questionable, that's probably not going to be the best candidate for your organization. Here are some questions around time management, some behavioral-based questions around time management. Did you see how they start out? As we said, give me an example of when. That's a good opening line in building out these behavioral-based questions. The top one, give me an example of when a project under your direction was late and how you dealt with the issue. Or the last one, tell me about a time when you had to balance competing priorities and did so successfully. In our organizations, in the roles that we play, there's a lot of competing priorities. And to be able to balance those in many roles is very important. So this is a good question that reveals to you how they behave when they're pressured around competing priorities. And again, what that's going to reveal to you is if that behavior is going to be a good fit in your organization. Is that behavior going to be accepted in our culture? Risk-taking. Here are some questions around that. How did you determine if a plan is worth the risk of rocking the boat? At times, we need to challenge the status quo in organizations, but you want to understand how they made that decision, and would that decision be acceptable in your organization. I'm going to run through the rest of these as we're running out of time, but here's one around technology skills and some questions around that. Give me an example when you had to adapt a technology into your process or your organization. How do you stay current in your field with new or evolving technologies? As we all know, technology changes almost weekly. And how do they keep appraised of that? How do they keep updated and current if technology skills are important in this role? We've talked about customer service. Here are some examples, sample questions around customer service. Tell me about a time when you had to go the extra mile to support an internal customer. Not all of us deal with external customers. Many of us deal with internal customers. The middle one, describe a situation when you had to handle a customer complaint. How did they do that? What behaviors, what traits did they display during that interaction with that customer, a complaining customer? And contrast their behavior with your expectations of one in your organization, and you'll quickly determine whether they would be a good fit, whether that would be acceptable in your organization. It may not be. I appreciate your attentiveness, and I want to give an opportunity to ask any questions to the participants in the Partners University webinar. If you have any questions, you're welcome to take your phone off mute at this time, or you can write those questions in the chat box to the right of your screen. If you have any questions, we'll entertain those now.
Kyle, you must have done a fantastic job. I don't see any questions coming in yet. Want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank Kyle for sharing his wealth of knowledge. Kyle will provide you a copy of this presentation if you want to give him an email. Send him an email at kkillingsworth@partners-hr.com. Again, Kate Killingsworth at partners-hr.com, and Kyle can send you a copy of this presentation. I want you also to know that we were recording this session, and we're going to put it up on our website with a link under webinars. That may have been where you were able to access us today. We appreciate you joining. Again, this is the beginning of our Partners University this year, and our August webinars, we'll have a couple of them, is on compliance in the world of HR. Be looking for that one to come up, and details about that to be in an email or on our website soon. We haven't determined the date on that. They'll be there shortly. And again, you can go to www.partnershr.com once we get it posted under our webinar section, and you'll be able to review this again if there were some things that you didn't have time to take notes on. Again, we'll open it up for questions here at the end. Anything about pay cards, anything about safety, anything about interviewing and hiring skills. All right, then. I think that will end our session then if no one has a question. Was that somebody? All righty then. We appreciate your time and have a fantastic rest of your week.